So from here, we're going to dive into discussing this topic further, and I would like to invite our great panel on stage, which will include Yelmar from Karma, Tanguy from Lizzie, Callie from Malzi and Lostock, who you've just met, and Rob from Toast Ale. Peter from Deloitte will be moderating the panel. And the panel will be about 30 minutes with some time for Q&A at the end. And we encourage you to please type questions in the chat window throughout the panel, and we'll be sure to get those answered at the end of the discussion.
Hi. Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you for the introduction. As you said, I work for Deloitte in the retail analytics practice. Retailers both in the UK and around the world deal with the sorts of challenges that Callie was outlining to us a moment ago. It's also why I'm particularly excited to be able to chair this panel today. I think the audience, the panel members that we've got here today, are bringing some really innovative approaches and solutions to dealing with the problem that, as Callie pointed out, all of these retail businesses are facing. So I'd like to introduce you to the panel, but before I do, just to get you warmed up, I'd like you to be thinking about any questions that you might like to ask the panel. I'm recording them in the chat window as we go through, and we'll spend a few minutes at the end going through your questions as well as the ones we've already prepared. So let's go through the panel members in order. I'll start Tanguy with you. Please introduce yourself.
Hey guys, so I'm Tanguy. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lizzie. We help retail brands and distributors to actually go from linear business model to circular business model, allowing them to actually rent instead of selling some of their products. And of course, unsold inventory is a good angle to actually tackle and to start renting.
Thanks, Tanguy. Rob, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, good evening. I am Rob, co-founder, chief toaster at Toast Ale. So we're on a mission to prove the alternative to food waste is delicious and pint-sized. So we're brewing our planet-saving beer using yesterday's bread from bakeries that would otherwise go to waste, and donating all our profits to environmental charities. So yeah, trying to save the world with beer. That is our mission.
That's a mission I'm sure we can all get behind. Let's stick with the food theme. And Yalmar, would you like to go next?
Definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Yalmar, and I wish I was the chief brewer at Toast. But I'm merely the CEO of Karma. We're a food waste saving app. We help restaurants, grocery stores, and cafes, bakeries, you name it, to upload their surplus at the end of the day and offer it to consumers who has their Karma app.
Fantastic, thank you. And Callie, I know you've just done a full session, but in case there have been any late joiners, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Hi, I'm Callie. I'm the CEO and founder of Malzi. We use a consumer shopping app to generate data that allows us to predict the performance of fashion items. During lockdown, I've also been the CEO of a company called Lostock, which allows you to buy cancelled items directly from factories and support a garment worker at the same time.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, Callie, you gave us a fantastic introduction. So I think you focused a lot on fashion, and we've got a couple of members of the panel here who look at other sectors, particularly around food. I was wondering, Yalmar, if I might come to you first, just to reflect on the sorts of examples that Callie gave in fashion and give us a view of what the problem of unsold or excess inventory might look like in some of the more food-focused businesses.
Definitely. I mean, it's huge, and it's across the food value chain. So we have problems from farms, basically, where you pull vegetables out of the ground. We have a selection process that's, if you go into any grocery store, I think everything's very uniform, eerily so. So already from the beginning all the way to the end, we have a problem with overproduction and sort of super small selection size in every single step. Excess inventory looks very different for different retailers. The grocery store is one thing, but if you take a restaurant, for instance, you might say that an a la carte restaurant would not be wasting as much as someone who's preparing salads in the morning to sell throughout the day, but they all have their unique inventory problems, like how much meat or fish are you going to order in order to make the required number of meals that you estimate that you're going to have to do for the upcoming week, or are you trying out a new dish that you haven't tried before, then you will very likely have little data on how many of these do we produce to have just enough. And plus, unfortunately, food is a numbers game for most people, which means that you always have to be selling as much as possible, which means overproduction and overstocking is sort of a common practice throughout the whole food value chain.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we tend to focus, or businesses quite often do tend to focus on the financial impact of that. But Rob, you were starting to bring in some of the sustainability angles as well. What sort of other factors do businesses need to take into account when they're thinking about the excess inventory?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're kind of tackling, I suppose, an excess on sort of two levels. So we're brewing our beer using an excess inventory in the baking sector. So the food, to sort of outline why this is even an issue, the food system has by far the biggest impact on the environment, and only just, I would say, worse than the sort of clothing industry. And so when it comes to food production, people normally think of the energy industry or the transportation industry as the kind of the culprits. But ultimately, it's the food system as a whole that causes a lot of deforestation, uses a lot of transportation. And a third of the food that we produce is wasted. So there's a massive issue with food waste. And the worst offender of them all is bread, the humble loaf of bread. And so 44% of the bread that's baked in the UK is never consumed. It's wasted, it's excess. Some of that's surplus to requirements when we as consumers purchase a product. Some of it is surplus in the retail sector where bread is baked because there's an expectation on certain key lines like milk, sugar, butter, bread, that you walk into any retailer at any time of day and you expect fresh produce. And there ends up as a surplus. And then for millennia, beer has been brewed using surplus bread. So the first ever beer that was brewed with bread thousands of years ago. And so we're then trying to tackle that issue and create a sustainable solution to this excess inventory that exists within the baking world by brewing it up into delicious beer in the hope that other brewers would join us. So we open source our recipe and we want others to copy us. And the idea is that then means that we can create a sustainable solution where a bit of a back of a napkin calculation, if every beer was brewed with surplus bread, we could solve that excess inventory challenge. And then of course we have our own challenge of inventory management, but that's a sort of a separate topic.
We won't probe you too hard on that one. No, I think it's very interesting because a lot of the points that you raised, both you and Hjalmar, are actually very directly analogous, I would suggest, to the fashion examples that Callie raised. Tombi, I don't know what parallels you see in fashion in particular, and how you think that we should be looking at that sector.
Fashion industry, I mean, it has its impact for sure. I mean, people say they're the second most polluting industry in the world, but it's definitely a problem. Sustainability, overproduction, overconsumption. I mean, people keep buying, cluttering their closet, and it's of course not an answer to the actual crisis that we're living. So brands needs to react to change the way they're actually going to market with their goods. Consumers are starting to shift, which is a very good news. So they have to adapt. And when it comes to excess of inventory, I mean, if just to give you an idea, like Zara, for example, they do 24 collections a year. So it means that they have a new collection every 2 weeks. With overproduction, of course, and trying to spend this inventory. But of course, it's not sustainable. Good thing is that now governments are creating barriers towards that. They're creating rules, regulations. At least in France now, you can't destroy products. Sometimes it's less expensive for a brand to actually just burn or put products in landfills. That's not an option anymore in France, and I think it's coming to Europe as well as a whole. So that's, of course, will be a massive problem for brands because they will have to do something about it. And as Kelly said earlier, discounting is not viable anymore. I mean, it's destroying the brand image. It's not viable financially speaking. So they will have to react and find ways, of course, of spending this inventory, this excess inventory. And one problem also in fashion, it's like pretty much like in food, but there is trends in fashion. The products that are not sold, this year, well, next year is going to be a new trend, and then those goods don't have much to do anymore. So, I mean, it's fashion is definitely there is huge issues in this field for sure.
Fantastic. I mean, I think Rob, that tells me you're going to have to get and find a way to brew beer out of clothing as well. But it's really interesting. I mean, the scale of the problem is clear from the answers that you guys have given. Callie, I wonder, just reflecting on your earlier presentation and the answers there, what do you think is a realistic aim for a lot of these retailers? Is it realistic to try and reduce excess inventory to nothing? How far should we be trying to go, and how fast should we be trying to get there?
I don't think we're ever going to get to zero, but we should definitely be trying to chip away at that. I think in the modern day, if you can get yourself down to a discounting rate of under 20%, you'll be doing well for where that sits. I think that's achievable for many businesses if you tackle the bull by the horns and kind of go from the get-go. I really believe this is the most pressing concern of retail today. I think a lot of businesses can be distracted by the technical challenges that kind of retail presents, but actually, as I was trying to say, is if you get the product right, and at the end of the day that is inventory management, if you get the product right, everything else becomes much that the marketing, all these same sorts of different elements just improve hugely. If you think of back to the example of the Zara dress, that became the standout seller of the year and sold huge volumes of it. Zara didn't have to market that product. It was just the perfect product for the customer base that they had at that point in time. And I think that's what we need to aspire to as retailers and as people in the retail business, is how do we make the perfect product for the consumer? And then that improves the inventory rate kind of alongside it. Those two things have to work hand in hand. And if I was working in a retail business and not helping retail businesses, this is the one thing that would be keeping me awake at night at this point in time, because if you improve that, everything else just becomes magnitudes easier.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I mean, it's clear advice for people, but I guess it's always a challenge to get there. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the other things that we can look to try and address that. Before we get into that, I wonder, just for many of you, actually, we'll go around, but this is obviously a problem that retailers have been struggling with for a long time. How has it been made worse by the current situation with COVID? Hjalmar, would you like to go first with a response on that, maybe?
Sure. I mean, given that one of the issues for inventory management in the food industry seems to be predictability, and it's difficult enough in normal times to say, if you're a restaurant, to say, understand whether or not the office across the street is away on an offsite this week, so you should skip 20 meals a day for that duration. I think that in itself is like an almost impossible problem without having massive amounts of data. And basically what COVID has done is reduce footfall on the high street, and we've seen it's just been a massive shakeup of the entire industry, and with different incentive programs that are great in a lot of cases, but that also shifts the dynamics of how much do you need to produce in order to match the now increased demand that might come from such incentive programs from governments. And this goes all the way up to the farms, where we've seen as soon as you are sort of shutting down restaurants and grocery stores or temporarily closing some of the hours, now you have problem from the wholesalers, and they will then have a purchasing problem to the farm. So we've gotten some, which in our eyes is horrific videos of like fields of leek, and even an entire like huge container of milk that was just dumped on the ground because it's going to go bad before it hits the final consumer at the end of the row. So it's just complete mayhem, I would say, from these big dynamic shifts in the market.
And Callie, would you, I guess some of the things you raised, particularly the lost stock example, Would you see similar patterns in the fashion world as well?
Yeah, so if we go back to the start of lockdown and when we set up Lost Stock, the reason why we did it was there was a huge amount of analysis and data out there, and people were talking about this as a huge problem. And the stat that stood out to us was that $2 billion worth of completed goods had been cancelled in Bangladesh. $2 billion completed goods that brands and retailers had just turned their backs on it and weren't picking up. And they have their reasons for doing that. I think that's numbers now about 16 billion globally in product that has been produced that has then not been picked up for where that bit sits. Retail footfall in fashion is still down, I think, around 40% in the UK, which shows you the impact that it's gone from that. I think all of this, number one, well, it makes a problem right here, right now, which is there's all this inventory out there. What do we do with it? How can we tackle it? What can we go and do about it? And Lost Stock, I think, has made a bit of a dent in that, but it's a tiny dent when you think of the scale of the problem. But what it then does is if you're a retailer, if you're a brand, if you've always been using historical sales data to then predict what you're buying next season and everything that goes for that, that's just null and void now. Like, all of that strategy is out the window, everything that goes from it. What people are buying is out the window as well. All of a sudden, if none of us are leaving the house, then who's buying occasion wear? ASOS's results today, that's one of the things that they were talking about. So all of these things just magnitude this problem, which is that we used to be, it used to be said that the UK was a nation of shopkeepers, a nation of retailers. I think that's a great saying, but actually I think that we're not that anymore, because actually, do you know what? We're so far away removed from the product, and we need to get back to that to understand that thing through. So I think the whole impact of COVID, as much as it's been felt by retailers today, it'll continue to be felt for a very long period of time, unless people very quickly change their approach and change their attitude specifically on that inventory side of things.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how long this continues, because as you say, the data is now corrupted for them for the next couple of seasons to think about how things are going to flow through. So some real challenges, but I guess people looking at innovative solutions like yours to gather more information in closer real time to try and understand what's happening. I'm going to come to Tommy and Rob next, just to ask a little bit about the customer's perception on that. So we've understood that there's a problem probably upstream in terms of buying, but that means there is a glut of product, and customers quite often will see that as old products, possibly substandard as a result. And historically, the perception has been, well, if that's the case, then you've got to discount it to get rid of it. Are you seeing that still being a prime mechanism to clearing excess inventory, or do you think there are other innovative approaches that you're starting to see in the market which retailers should be adopting or should be experimenting with? Tongi, I'll come to you first and give Rob a chance to think.
So I believe that old stock, if it's well marketed, is not, the perception is not bad for sure. I mean, if you look at vintage, even like secondhand product, thanks to platforms like Vinted, like Vestiaire Collective, it's really the new cool per se. It's really cool to shop secondhands. And I think if brands, and actually it's happening now, if you look at companies like Nike, like IKEA, even H&M in Sweden, they're now using their installed inventory and start a renting business and creating additional value out of it instead of just discounting it. So, and people, when we talk about the functional economy, the usage economy, people, just use instead of just buying. For example, if you don't think about fashion, but for example, we're about to kickstart a rental business for a do-it-yourself company here in France. We are about to rent drill. You don't really care, if it's a drill from 2 years ago or just this year. What you just want to do is to rent this drill, just do a hole to put your new frame on the wall, and really, it's the usage which matters, not really the product. It's the experience that you're about to leave with this. Certainly, like the old stock, but the experience you're going to leave with the brand, and digital is really allowing now to leave a really cool experience. And I think it's exactly the same with apps like Karma. While you're using it because it's just so simple, so seamless to actually participate to the new economy and avoid waste. So old stock really can be turned into pretty cool value for brands, and as far as consumer is concerned. So having access to those products at the discount rate is important, but it's also sustainable. The variety of products you can actually access, spending 20 euro, you can actually get, 2 products instead of 1. This is very important, especially for millennials today. They don't really care about owning. There are many studies out there that explain that they rather use than own, and they like to really churn their wardrobe, for example. And if they buy, they won't be able to do it because they don't have the cash. But if they just rent, well, it becomes much more affordable. So yeah, as far for both the brands and the retailers and the consumers, I see that the perception is definitely changing, and there is value to get from the model for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. I think it's going to pose some real structural challenges to a lot of the retailers who are used to selling products, who might have to start thinking about some of those different service models that you talked about. And Rob, obviously your entire business is focused on reusing an excess product. How do you get that messaging right to customers to make them find that attractive?
Yeah, it's challenge. Using words like surplus instead of waste, because the amount of times I've had people offer me their kind of moldy bread from the back of their bread bin, thinking that we could take that and turn it into our beer, is a little bit concerning. But I think also, just building on the previous sort of question, I think in our industry, where a lot of the beer is in packaged format, you would hope that, on the whole, we'd never need to use a service like Karma and discount the stock, because in normal times, packaged beer has 12 months life. And if you've got excess inventory with a product that has 12 months life, then something's really, really wrong with your inventory management process, because we would aim to have, beer that's only ever on hand for like 1 month maximum. Otherwise you're just paying for storage that you really shouldn't be paying for. And so it's only really in the last 6 months, due to the current circumstances, that we then find ourselves in this really tough situation of actually having packaged product coming near the end of its life. Then there's kegged kind of beer. And so the market's been flooded with very cheap or free beer from the big breweries. So the craft brands owned by Heineken or Anheuser-Busch or Asahi have just been flooding the market with free beer, so that all the pubs are saturated with just completely free beer that they're then selling on to consumers at market rate. You would never know as a consumer that the beer they're selling they were given for free. But that does cause a real challenge for us, independent craft brewers, to somehow try and compete. But what we've done, I think this is a really important lesson, is around just upcycling and just upcycle the value. So our kegged beer, we've had about 200 kegs one of our biggest accounts was the XL Centre in London, which is still a Nightingale hospital, thankfully an empty one, and long may it remain an empty hospital, but it's certainly no longer an event centre. And that was our biggest account for lager. We'd brew like hundreds and hundreds of kegs that would just sell every couple of months, and you'd do another big brew. Obviously, the brew we did in March never got drunk, and that's now come to the end of its life. We're turning that into a moonshine, so basically turning it into a whiskey, but we're not aging it. So an unaged whiskey, we're calling it the inbred moonshine, which you're basically increasing the value of the liquid. So we'll have about 100 bottles of spirits that will come from this, and the margin we'll make on that spirit is actually comparable, if not a little bit more than the margin we would have made on that kegged beer to begin with. And so just constantly, upcycling, I think, the value, rather than thinking that the only solution is discounting. There are other options available to you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, really thinking on your feet to look for different solutions, and I guess that's what all of these businesses need to do. Just a quick note to the audience: we're coming up on Q&A in a few minutes, so please do get any questions in through the chat window, and we'll try to address those in a few minutes. As we're coming towards the end of this discussion, gentlemen, I think I'd like to ask each of you for just a bit like Callie was talking about earlier, if you could pick one piece of advice for retailers now, whether it's across understanding the volume to begin with and getting that right, or whether it's how they clear anything that's left at the end, any aspect of this problem, what would be the one piece of advice that you think they should take? Yoma, would you like to go first?
This is basically where we get to do the plug. So I mean, from our end, it would definitely be get in touch. I mean, I would say our industry, and I'm unfortunately don't have the same insights into the fashion industry, but there's some consensus that food waste is a common thing that you don't necessarily have to do something about. It's a natural phenomenon of running a food business, and that seems to stick around really hard with a lot of the retailers that we work with. So, and it takes some convincing to get them to understand that, like, we can actually turn this waste into increased revenue, more footfall, awareness, and most of all, like, employee happiness and reduced CO2. So you can actually, like, there's a myriad of benefits from taking care of your surplus. And I think this goes for any retailer. I don't think this is exclusive to food waste, but for some reason, like, waste is still sort of an accepted part of running a business these days. So I would say the advice is get ahead of the curve and make it unacceptable.
I hope they listen to that. I'm sure they will do. It's a fantastic piece of advice. Tongi, how about you? What would be your thought that you'd leave them with?
I mean, consumers are really shifting, at least in the fashion. I mean, the retail industry, like, not good, but retail consumers are shifting. They're aware about their impact, and I think the COVID-19 is really enhancing this. And they want to do better, to consume better. And I think brands need to be bold. I think it's the right moment. If they haven't done so before, they need to, to take the bull by the horn. I don't know if you say that in English, but that's a translation from a French expression. But basically, they need to be really bold and start, offering new options to consumers. Stop, pointing like new products all the time under their nose. They need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem anymore. And I think they're all, even the fast fashion companies like H&M is doing a great job trying to shift their business model towards more sustainability, because they're really aware that we don't have a planet B, that they have to change the way they go to market. And those that don't move today, I'm really convinced that in just 5 years, they won't be there anymore.
It's existential, right? Particularly with the current climate and the current competitive environment, COVID and everything else, it's tough for retailers. So they need to be thinking about every possible angle. Yeah, very interesting. I'm moving around my screen in clockwise order. So, Rob,
I think, not just saying this because Yama's on the call, but my number one bit of advice whenever we talk about retail is those that aren't yet signed up to Karma, Too Good To Go, blasphemy to mention them, sorry, Yama, or like Olio. All just, there's awesome technology out there, which brings in a completely different consumer base normally as well into the food and drink industry, where you're typically talking younger audience that wouldn't necessarily be going into that shop or bakery or delicatessen. Just like sign up to it because it's win-win-win, reducing the waste, still receiving some revenue, the consumer getting a bargain. And so I think that discounting model absolutely has its place. But I then think there's businesses that are doing a phenomenal job. So, online retailers like Picnic in Europe, on the continent, in places like the Netherlands, at having a very low wastage level, as well as Ocado in the UK, now worth more than Tesco's. So the market value of Ocado, higher than that of Tesco's. And it's only got 1% of the market share, and that's because it's forward thinking and it's innovating. And so I think that these kind of models as well, that do embrace technology and actually reduce wastage because they can supply on demand. We've spoken to the likes of Ocado and Picnic in the past about their bread wastage, and it is so much lower than the bread waste that we see from the big retailers that are physical in their infrastructure, because they can just bake on demand. And yeah, you know what your market demand is the day before, you bake it that night, you deliver it the next morning. And so I think that model has got to yeah, keep coming for reducing waste.
I think that's a really positive message, Rob. I mean, the fact that there are almost role models out there that are showing the way that others can look to, and as you said, the fact that a lot of these technologies are available to people now, and they open up a whole new customer base. I mean, that's got to be hugely
exactly. I
exciting.
mean, that and stocking
retailers.
Toast, obviously, and replacing all the Heineken, all the Budweiser. But yeah.
Well, I think that would have gone without saying. You know, we'll all have seen that.
It's surprising that they haven't yet,
to
but I'm
buy
sure
themselves
it's coming.
Well, thank you. And Callie, you've given us loads of advice throughout the evening. Is there anything that you summarise as your single best tip?
I think, well, firstly, is go and buy some Toast, go download Karma and start renting your stuff out, so I can plug everyone else around us. I actually, from my side on this, is get to know what your customer actually wants. I think one of the biggest fallacies in retail is that people think they know what the consumer wants, or that, you know, they've got that, well, I know what they are, or I know who the consumer is. It's something that I end up battling with all the time with buyers and talking about, because in many cases they don't. And actually, you know, that is the huge problem that's facing any retail business, no matter what that sits as, is that we think what the consumer wants is what we want them to have, sort of thing. And actually, we need to go and talk to them. We need to engage with them. We need to listen to them. We need to really understand that consumer. If we can understand that consumer, what we can end up doing is we can actually end up tackling the inventory problem at the very start, and not end up getting ourselves in situations where we buy over, you know, 35,000 units of a t-shirt and then only sell 30% of them at full price, because we wouldn't have bought that t-shirt anyway. You know, the example that I provide there, you know, when I questioned that buyer about why she'd bought that product, in a nice way, you know, it was because she'd sold something similar the year before. And if we tackle that, if we get the customer, if we speak to our customer, and there's lots of ways to do that. Yes, you can come and pay Molesy Insights money and we can test products for you, but you can just get out there and do it in lots of other ways. I think every business should do it. I think from the CEO all the way down to the buyer or the admin or whatever, speak to more and more of your customers, because that will help improve all of your inventory issues.
I think a fantastic piece of advice, and I see that myself with retailers, that it's quite a nervous thing to do, to have to make a commitment 12, 18 months ahead of what the fashion's going to be. So if you can get data, you can get insights to do that, you should be leaping on it. But I think
if someone hates a product, so this is something we always talk about, someone's like, oh, well, they don't know what the customer doesn't want to know what they want in 12 months time. That's probably correct in some cases. But see, if they fundamentally hate a product today, no matter what the trend is, they will not like it in 6 months time or 12 months time or anything that goes with it. We've got this, you know, the Molesy score, which is between 1 and 10. And, you know, we're like, you know, if something's a 5 or a 6, it might make it there. And it's like, still worth taking a punt. See if something's getting like a 3 or a 4, I just don't bother. Don't waste your time. It's just not going to happen. No matter how much we think that's the trend thing and we're all cool and we're 6 months in front of the customer, they're not going to get there. It's too far for them. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money.
Yeah, I think it's a great piece. And I was going to say, I mean, I think the other thing I took from your response of talking to the customer, I think we could take more generally to
100%.
everything we've talked about this evening, that actually not just talking about products, but talking about how does the customer want to, for example, see some of that surplus stock handled? Would they be interested in some of the rental channels or reuse that we've talked about through other mechanisms? And engaging, it's a really strong brand message to engage with customers to understand that as well. So I think it's a really positive message you're getting to land on at the end of the session. And we've had a few questions come in on the Q&A. So some of them are directed to individuals and some of them are posed around the team. Tongi, I'll go from the bottom of my list first. There's a question for you asking what kind of margins can clothing brands achieve through a rental model, and in what kind of time frame can clothing brands expect to recover their costs and see that value come back?
So there is not one strict answer. It really depends about, you know, what products, what objectives you're trying to achieve renting some goods. But usually it's a new business model. So it has to be profitable and it has to be, you know, across like not too many years. So usually what we try to achieve is about, you know, over 24 months, you can up to double and triple your gross margin in retail. So usually you get gross margins between 10 to 30%, sorry, of gross margin. But the other, return on investment that you get is definitely you're potentially using stock that haven't been sold. It helps also drive traffic to the store. It's a pretty cool way to actually drive traffic. And if it's subscription-based rental, you also drive recurring traffic to your stores as well. It's also a good way to get data about usage on your products. Usually retailers, when they sell a good, they don't really know what's going on with it. When you actually rent it, every time it comes back to you. So you get data on the usage, and you can provide data back to the manufacturer people, so they can improve the quality of the goods. So that's also a very good a good way. And especially brands today, when it starts renting, I mean, the main buying persona that you're focusing on when you rent are the millennials and the Gen Z, who really are keen to rent because they don't care about owning anymore. And so it's a good way for brands to really start tackling those guys and start, diversifying, sorry for my French, their customer targets. So it's not just about finance, but of course it has to be profitable. There are many other good reasons for a brand or a distributors to actually start renting.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. That's a very comprehensive response. I'm going to direct this next question mainly at Hjalmar, but also Tanguy and Callie, you may have a view as well. And there's a question, one of the first ones we got through, in fact, which was actually just asking, and you guys are obviously collecting a lot of information. In fact, Rob, probably you're also getting a lot of information about where certain retailers are creating excess. And are we feeding that information back into them to help them with their planning so that they're producing less excess, and you're almost doing yourselves out of business? Hjalmar, any response to that question?
That was a very specific question, and I'm glad it was asked. And to Callie's point, I think that the future of any sort of business handling inventory is about producing the right amount from the start rather than overproducing and then just shrugging to all the excess. So the answer is yes, literally our entire model. And I would say that the difference between us and all the other food waste apps / solutions out there is that we actually force our poor retailers to upload each single item. They have to specify if it's a Caesar salad, and they can't just throw it in a bag and say like, oh, we don't really care what it was something. So now we have tens of millions of rows of data that actually helps us to predict what the patterns actually look like, and what is, for instance, one of the most wasted things, like Rob said before, is bread and bread-related products. So, for instance, one of the things that continuously pop up is when a bakery does like 5 trays too much croissants. And compared to a lot of other things on Karma, maybe at 8 p.m., 5 trays of croissants are not going to get rescued in most places, at least. So you would benefit from, you might be able to overproduce a couple of salads because that can be saved. But if you could do like 1, 2, 3 trays less of baked goods every single day, that makes a huge difference in the end, because the win from actually preventing food waste in the first place is almost 10 times as high as producing it and reselling it. So I think the future of waste in general lies in prediction and prevention and analytics, so you know what you're actually doing.
I totally agree with that. And at the end of the day, that's our whole business model, is that we've built our whole business around, we generate data and we sell it to brands and retailers to help them improve. We've always tried to stay away from, we've done it recently with lost stock in regards to, holding inventory and the logistics piece, but the rest of the time has always been, we don't want to be involved in that. We capture the data, we're great at capturing data, we're great at analyzing it, and then we bring it into play in your business. Because we obviously own the place where the data is captured, and the same for the guys at Karma, hopefully that means that we don't end up disappearing, because we're the thing that brings the data to the party and the analysis piece that goes with it. But you just evolve and you kind of tweak your way around that. And I think the thing that I would be stressing to retailers as well just now is that now is the time to be collaborative. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes, especially with big retailers, is that it's always like, well, we've got to this size, we know what we're doing, X, Y, and Z. Well, no one knows anything at all anymore, because the world is all totally different. So now is the great time to actually collaborate and bring in companies of all different shapes and sizes, and whether that's Deloitte, whether that's Karma, whether it's Lizzie, whether it's us, whether it's Toast, whatever it is that it looks like. to help benefit your business in the long term.
So what an amazing world it would be if we actually solved the inventory excess problem and there was zero waste. That would be...
I'm free for the rest of the night. Like, you know, I mean, if we get our heads around that, you know, I can see the code up behind you. Like, let's get our heads together, boys. By the end of the night, we'll be finished. Inventory will be sorted.
This is the secret solution to all of our problems in the background.
Well, now you promised it. We'll come back to you tomorrow and see what we've managed to do. And we have 2 more questions to run through, and then we can move to networking sessions. The first one, actually, probably it's more, Tommy, for you and Callie, but how do you think that luxury fashion retailers are improving how they handle surplus inventory? I think you remember there's been some press around luxury brands in the past where they were literally burning excess stock, and that really didn't go down very well. So a lot of them have put effort into trying to adjust to that. What have you seen, and how you see those brands in particular trying to adjust?
I think the rental piece that, you know, Tongi's looking at there, I'm sure he can talk to in more depth, but, you know, there's a lot of great rental solutions out there just now. We're partnered with a couple on Lost Stock to allow people, if they do get something in their box, because it's a mystery box, they can then go and swap it with other people in terms of swap platforms. But the rental piece is huge. I think the challenge facing luxury brands on that side is if you're at the very, very forefront of fashion, how do you use data to predict what people want in the future? And then you really do live and die by how good your buyers are, how good your haloed person is, your Tom Ford, whoever it is that it looks like at that point in time. I think for businesses like that, it's about actually, to improve your inventory, you need to improve your supply chain, because you can't utilize the same things that maybe your mass market brands or retailers can. So what you have to do is you have to find a way to reduce your time to market so that you can then adopt these kind of smaller runs and you can be bringing stuff to market much, much quicker. And I think stuff like, you know, especially when we're starting to talk about kind of 3D printing, these sorts of different tools will help lots of businesses in the luxury sector. What I would love to see more and more of is a pre-order model. And I think, you know, looking at like 3D design tools like Browserware, Clo, these sorts of offerings, they're amazing. Like, the product looks real. I'd love to see more and more of that. I think if we're going to go down that route, though, all of us as consumers, we have to accept that, you know, we can't just get something delivered the next day, and it might take, you know, 3-4 weeks because it's got to be built and it's got to be made through from that. And I think for luxury, if we can break that instant gratification curve with consumers, that could be really, really powerful for those businesses.
No, I agree with Kelly, and I think, I mean, the luxury industry, as far as excess inventory, they're probably the worst with what they do with it today. Still, even though it's now, you know, forbidden to burn and to destroy, still we don't see the product, you know, on rental too much. We don't see them. And they don't discount, so it has to go somewhere, and we don't really know where. They're not so transparent about it. So I think the luxury industry is really late with that, but they're doing a lot, as you said, Kelly. You know, trying to produce less, to produce better, and to really better to get better design. But when it comes to overstock, still I think there is a lot of improvements that they can achieve for sure.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tommy. And Callie, we're going to ask you for the final question. It's come to you. Can you share your thoughts on how fashion brands are thinking and positioning themselves around using organic or more sustainable materials and fabrics?
I think this is a really, really interesting topic, actually. And there's some great brands that have just appeared in that space sort of thing. So, you know, there's a new brand called New In, which is going absolutely hammer and guns it's kind of a direct to consumer sustainable, but like it's, you know, very fashionable, very fast sort of product sort of cycles, but it's all sustainable products and everything that kind of goes around that. So I'd recommend people check those guys out. I think for consumers, more and more people want to shop in that way. I think the challenge that businesses face is if you don't manage your inventory, and if you're a retail business trying to move to sustainable products, then what you're going to have is that because you've still got this fat and you've still got all these problems in your normal business, the cost of those products will be significantly higher, because these products do cost more money just to produce and everything that goes for that. That's a huge issue, and I think is the blocker to stop many people getting to that place much, much quicker. I think what we need to do is we need to help those businesses tackle all those inefficiencies. And if you tackle those inefficiencies, then these businesses can get to that sustainable eco sort of thing much, much quicker. Sadly, you know, when we think about clothing and apparel, like, people have a certain price concept in their mind, and very few, only a relatively small part of the market will go outside of that. So if you're used to paying if you're a 16-year-old girl and you're used to paying £20 for a Boohoo dress, you're not all of a sudden going to pay £35 because it's an eco dress, chances are, for where that piece sits. So, you know, that's the jump. So you're still going to have to deliver that product at the price point or close to that price point, but you're going to have to do it in an eco-sustainable sort of way. To do that, you need to find efficiencies in other ways, in other sorts of manners. And that's the thing that we all need to tackle, and we need to help brands and retailers tackle. And actually for us, that means if you tackle the inventory problem and all the waste, because that's where the biggest waste is in any retail business, if you tackle that problem there, you free up financial resources that can allow you to actually do, you know, the right thing in regards to the product that you're making, all the ethical choices that kind of go in and around it. But if you don't fix those problems, then you don't have the margin to play with to allow yourself to do that. So we've got to fix those problems if we want to generate big, long-term, global, change the whole industry type outcome. Because if we don't, we're just going to be scraping the surface with the changes that we're doing.
I think it sounds like a topic for an entirely separate conversation. We could fill an evening just on that alone. So, look, gentlemen, thank you very much for your contributions this evening. I found it a fascinating conversation. I think you've laid out really clearly some of the challenges that every retailer is facing in terms of trying to think about their excess, how they plan better, how they actually get the right quantities, how they manage them through season, and then how they clear it in lots of innovative different ways. But I think what was really positive, as I mentioned, was that you've shown that there are great solutions out there. Retailers just need to grab hold of them, and some of them are already doing that. You've highlighted some particular names who are really leading in this field. And yes, there's a message on all of us as consumers as well. We need to perhaps start thinking differently and changing our behaviours. But it's a really, really exciting topic. And I think everyone who's in the audience will have found something they can take away from it. So thank you all very much. And with that, I'll hand back to Amy.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.